Michael is a resilience coach, relationship guide, transpersonal and somatic educator, human system optimization instructor, and transpartisan social entrepreneur. Michael Ostrolenk has been exploring the relationship between post-conventional living, transformational leadership, optimizing health, and regenerative paradigms his entire life. After receiving his master's degree in transpersonal counseling psychology from John F. Kennedy University, he completed his postgraduate training in somatic psychology from the California Institute for Integral Studies with a focus on body-oriented psychology. As a marriage and family therapist, he has served patients dealing with mental illness, neurological impairments, chronic and life-threatening diseases, and relationship problems. As a transpartisan social entrepreneur, Michael has consulted for Center for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics, International Center of the Study of Psychiatry and Psychology, Pentagon Budget Campaign, and the Arlington Institute, among others. Committed to excellence as a lifelong learner, he graduated from the SEALFIT's 3-week academy in 2009 and has completed SEALFIT Kokoro Camp, where he has become a master coach and head instructor with the SEALFIT Unbeatable Mind Academy. Michael is also the director of human resilience at Enzo, where he works with medical and psychological staff in creating online and in-person programs seeking to transcend the limits of human performance and health. So Michael is not just an expert at his craft, but the dude is an absolute badass. If you're unfamiliar with the term SEALFIT, SEALFIT is a company that was created by Mark Devine, a former Navy SEAL commander and one of the previous guests on our show. And he's created this crucible called Kokoro, which is a 50-hour non-stop crucible where essentially it models Navy SEAL Hell Week. So Michael not only talks the talk and is an expert in his field of psychology, but also walks the walk and challenges himself and pursues a life of excellence, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to have him on this show. Michael's helped me in various areas of my life, and there have been times where I've had coaching sessions with him that he just very massively had me do a certain breathing exercise at a very particular point in a conversation that ended up creating an entire breakthrough for me without him even using his words. So the dude is amazing. I absolutely love this guy, and I'm grateful to know him, and I know you'll enjoy this episode. So Michael, how did you get into the work that you do? Because you've helped me a lot tremendously as one of my coaches, and I'm just curious what that journey has been like for you.
Well, if we ask my folks, perhaps I fell out of the womb in this space. my memory, first memory, kind of getting into the field of human potential, human growth, and all the subsets of it was around age 9.
Age 9.
So yeah, I had some health and learning disabilities as a kid, and school was really hard, although I was really smart, and health conditions at the time were not treated the same way they were today. So I had some things going on inside my head, put it that way.
Yeah.
Which we can talk about later if you wanted to, but my mom took me to see a psychiatrist, and we talked for like the first 45, 50 minutes. And at the end of the session, I turned to her and I said, "He's fat and he smokes, can't help himself. How's he going to help me? I don't want to see him."
Wow.
And I left.
That's very insightful for a 9-year-old.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty fucking obnoxious, actually.
I would have thought the same thing.
Yeah. Fortunately, my mom was on my side, and she's like, "Okay, you don't have to see him again," which I'm really happy that she took my side, because most likely he just would have put me on a medication. This is 1979, and there's no other options. Well, even today, most psychiatrists put people on medication, but my mom found me a psychologist, Pat Lawson, and Mrs. Lawson was great. So she taught me biofeedback, and this is 1979. So you can just imagine, like, the technology is pretty poor. Balloons. If you relax, the balloon would rise. If you're stressed out, the balloon would fall on the computer screen. Nothing like it is today. But she taught me biofeedback. She taught me guided imagery. She taught me meditation. She got me into the martial arts. So that kind of opened my whole world up to like all the stuff that you and I talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Spirituality and nutrition, fitness and health, and human optimization and relationship stuff. So that set me first on the path of personal interest. It didn't become professional too much later, which I can get into.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the story. I'm sure, because it's a very interesting background that you have, and the people that you help, the way that you've helped them have been in like some really spectacular ways. So I'd love to hear how it blossomed and some of the stories that have come out of that.
Yeah. So At age 9, my first 3 books I bought myself were Zen Mind, No Mind by Daisetsu Suzuki, Zen and the Martial Arts, and a book on yoga.
A lot
And
of
I'm sure, like,
9.
yeah. Well, and I'm sure if I had no effing idea what I was reading, but I was really drawn to it. Like, I don't probably didn't know what I meant, what was meant by the words, but I was like,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, Eastern philosophy I was drawn to.
Mhm.
So from that moment forward, there's a magazine called East West Journal out when I was a kid into early teenagerhood. I used to get that, and all the people I eventually studied with in grad school were like talked about in those magazines. So it was really cool. Eventually, like 20 years
Wow.
later, or 15 years later, to like pop like, oh my god, I read about you 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So it was always a private interest.
Mhm.
So back in the day, besides those books, was like Ram Dass. It was The Way, The Peaceful Warrior. Those kind of books were
Mhm.
kind of popping onto my bookshelf.
Yes.
Private interest, publicly. I was in college. Government was my degree. History was my minor. I think I also did a minor in business or something.
Mhm.
Ended up doing an interview with someone in the government because my plan at the time actually was to go either military or law enforcement intelligence.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, I was born and raised in a suburb outside of Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
So all our neighbors were military, law enforcement, like FBI,
Yeah, that was the environment you
CIA,
grew up in.
contractors. It's just the environment, like what I was drawn to.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you a funny story in a second about that. But so then I did this interview, and it ended up being a family friend. So privately, he's like, "Hey, you should go back and get your degree, an MBA." This is the '80s. MBA is really big back then. That
Mhm.
way, you can
That was the
come into
thing.
this. Yeah, yeah, it was a thing. So he said, "Anyway, you can come into the government agency that was interviewing for at a higher level." So I started an MBA program, and I was doing fine. I think they were like a 3.5.
Mhm.
And then, unfortunately, a dear friend of mine since I was 5 was murdered,
Oh, wow.
and kind of like gave me the dark night of the soul. Like, oh my, what's life? What's the purpose of life? I was kind of depressed, not kind of, I was depressed and like
Mhm.
kind of in shock. He was killed in a bar fight. There was a fight.
Mhm.
They took it outside. The guy got a gun and killed him.
Wow.
So just like blew my world open. It got me thinking, like, what do I really want to do with my life? Life is so precious. Like those kind of internal conversations.
Mhm.
And then a month later, one of my professors committed suicide, which is like nailed the coffin.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, what do I really want to do? And it's not the MBA because I had no interest in any of the things I was learning, like accounting.
Mhm.
The only thing that was interesting to me was the psychology of management.
Mm.
And I was like, well, if I'm going to study what I really want to study, why don't I just go back to my original interest, which I already discussed with you, more the spirituality and the human optimization stuff.
Mhm.
And I left that MBA program. I was pretty close to finishing, but I was like, no, it's not for me.
Mm.
And I moved out to California, and I did my graduate studies first at John F. Kennedy University in transpersonal counseling psychology,
Mhm.
became a licensed therapist, and then I did my postgraduate training at the California Institute for Integral Studies in somatic psychology. So I'll stop there. That's it starts to get professional.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a crazy story. And what's really interesting is, like anything else, right? Mortality of when our own mortality comes into question, or when the mortality of those who are close with us or those that we love uh, confronts them in that way. What's really interesting about it is it puts everything in perspective, right? It's that whole Stoic concept of memento mori, where death is the ultimate equalizer that puts priority right in front of your face. And like, what do I actually want to do with my time? Because it's very clearly limited and precious given the things that I've just experienced.
Exactly. And actually, one of the practices I've done over the years is meditate in cemeteries for that reason, as a reminder of death.
Mm-hmm.
So like integrating the Buddhist practice of meditation with the Stoic recognition of what you just walked through.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's yeah, it's crazy because when I hear your story, one thing that I think about is how when I was in school, I was actually doing personal training as like my first business. Like I was just like a freelance personal trainer, and I was studying kinesiology, and I absolutely hated it. I didn't have the endurance to go through as much of it as you did your MBA. Like within the first year, I knew I was like, this is not for me. But the thing that I was really fascinated by was the psychology of what it took for a person to transform the way that they viewed themselves so that they could make a transformation in their body. And I wasn't really interested necessarily in the science of it. I loved that process of helping somebody shift the way that they thought about themselves and what they were capable of. And I realized that that was not a topic that was taught in school, and which is why I went the coaching route.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll just do a plug of you. You're an excellent coach.
Thank you.
I've actually seen, no, seriously, I've actually seen you teach. So
Thank
good
you.
on you for having that realization and like, oh, this is my path.
Yeah.
Not this over here. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a tough decision, right? Like, I'm sure you went through your own share of it when you were leaving your MBA, and perhaps you had family or friends or teachers like, what are you doing? Like, you're almost done. Like, and you're going to go for this psychology stuff? Like, what do you know?
Well, and not even psychology stuff, but transpersonal psychology.
Yeah. So not even like
the hell is that?
psychology.
Yeah.
Not even the accepted form of psychology.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
That's intense. And so in that, I mean, I'm sure there are people listening to this who have wanted to do something that goes against, what their friends, family, and, maybe teachers, depending on where they're at in life, have wanted them to do. What was it that allowed you to make that decision despite some of the criticism that you got?
Well, great question. I have a long history of challenging the status quo since elementary school. And the funny story in my family is my dad, when I was in elementary school, I would get in trouble. When I say in trouble, I don't mean like behaviorally, but like my ideas would get me in trouble. And I'd challenge teachers on things. Well, my dad says, oh, wait till you get out of elementary school. Once you get into high school, everything's gonna be better. And I got in a lot of trouble in high school. And I can tell you stories if you want, but then
I would love to
it's
hear.
like, just wait till you get to college. Everything's gonna be fine. They're open for ideas and debates and dialogues. And I got into college, I got in trouble. I'm like, holy shit. Just wait to get to grad school. I get to grad school. And even though I was in an alternative grad school, I still got myself in trouble.
Right.
Oh God, this is never gonna end. So, I've always been contrary to the consensus reality, but not in a offensive kind of way. Just I'm really curious and I ask a lot of questions, and I don't take the face value of what people say back to me as at face value. I'm like, there's more to it. I have to keep probing. And if people say to me, "Oh, you're just if their sentiment is, oh, you're a kid, what do you know?" That didn't never stop me from keep pushing back. Right. And I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
In a fun way. This is in high school. I wrote a paper for one of my classes, and let's see. She was a born again Christian, which is fine. Nothing kind of cool. And I can tell you another story about that too. And I wrote a paper that was kind of Life of Brian-ish, Monty Python-ish, and it really offended her. So she gave me a 0, but it offended her religious sensibilities, not because I did poor grammar or poor spelling.
Yeah, it wasn't anything wrong with the writing.
Yeah. But I was just making fun of certain concepts in conventional life in my story.
Yeah.
But not rudely. Like, it really was kind of fun, light. It wasn't like this kind of stuff. But she gave me a 0. And fortunately, once again, my mom came in and she's like, wait, what? And then we got the grade reversed.
Yes.
So that, So there's a long history of either my mom or dad. Because when you're a kid, you really can't defend yourself against a teacher.
Correct.
But my mom or dad would show up in the various school classes, talk to the teacher, and kind of reverse things for me because they saw that majority of the time I was correct. I'll give you another example. I'm learning disabled. And I got put into a program, I think, in 3rd grade. And I kept seeing that I was given the same assignments as everyone else. And I was like, I'm not going to do it because my learning disabilities are different than yours. You're just wasting my time.
Right.
So I refused. And I was really clear about that. So
it sounds like you were very intentional about it. It wasn't just like, I don't want to do it. It's like, no, that's not what my issue is.
Exactly. And I love to learn. So it's not like I'm lazy and I didn't want to learn. I on my own did a lot of reading and studying, but I refused to do the work. So I spent a lot of time in the principal's office and she would give me a hard time and yell at me for not complying. I'm like, but they're wasting my time. Why would I want to spend an hour doing something that's not going to be helpful to me? So eventually my dad had to come in here and set her straight to set this teacher, so I eventually got help, which is great. My parents were really supportive that way. But
That's amazing.
I'll give you one more story because they're fun, at
Yeah.
least for me.
Oh, they're fun to listen to. So yes.
Okay, good. I had, I think it was geometry, trigonometry, one of those math classes. And you remember you had to do proofs? You had to write out proofs.
Mhm.
Maybe it was trig. It's so long ago. I couldn't write them out. I could only do them in my head.
Mm.
So my teacher kept saying, "You're cheating, you're cheating, you're cheating," because you're supposed to be able to write them out, but I couldn't. But I just figured it out in my head, and I could tell her the answer. But like, watch me. I'm not looking at other people's papers. Like, for whatever reason, I can figure these things out.
Mhm.
So retrospectively, the answer should have been, "Wow, how do you do that?" But that's not what they did back then. It was more like, "You're a bad kid and you need to get some help." So my parents found me a tutor. She was a math tutor who taught me the right way of doing it so I could not get in trouble in school. So that, that was like a compliance thing. Like, I don't know how to get out of this. I have to do it the right way. I learned how to do it the right way. But the fun thing is my tutor was also born again Christian. And she spent the first half an hour teaching me how to do it right, and the other half an hour trying to convert me. And I never told my folks, because they would have pulled me out immediately. But I loved it because I just engaged with her, and like, I learned so much from her about her perspective on Christianity. So it was like really a fun conversation. So I looked like over a year, maybe 6 months. Like I learned so much about Christianity from her born again perspective.
Yeah,
it was really kind of cool.
No, that is super cool, because at least for myself, and I'm sure you as well, you've worked with people that have varying belief systems and even like religious belief systems that are very different from your own, like things that you don't espouse in your own life. And what I found is, like, just because I don't agree with what they think the world is or what life is, kind of thing, doesn't mean I can't learn something, doesn't mean I can't appreciate their world. And at least from a coaching perspective, it's really important to be able to get into somebody's world to show them that you understand what they're feeling and talking about. Otherwise, your words land on deaf ears when you go to help them in any form of therapy or coaching. So I think it's really interesting to have that perspective that you did, and very intuitive as well, especially as a kid, to be like, yeah, let me learn about this.
Yeah. And you and I share spiral dynamics in common. So we understand complexity of stages of development and stuff like that. So I didn't have that model back then. I have it now, obviously, as an adult. I studied it formally. Like, I must have some intuition at the time, like, oh, this is interesting. Some curiosity and intuition.
Yes.
Like, I don't have all the answers. I'm really curious about life. Explain to me how you see the world. And for me, I like building maps, mental models, like, ooh, bigger, more expansive, more inclusive. So the more people I talk to have different worldviews than my maps expand, and I could understand them better and understand like the dynamic balances or unbalances in many cases that occur between conflicting worldviews.
That's right.
Yeah, it's kind of really cool.
It is. And now I'm curious, because I've not talked about spiral dynamics on this show before. It's something that I use, but I'm curious, like, how you use spiral dynamics, or like if we could even go into like what they are for the audience, as well as how you use them in your work.
Well, actually, since you just did some training, maybe it'd be best for you to explain what spiral dynamics is in a minute.
Oh, Michael, you're my guest. I want to hear the way you. I'm
curious.
And don't worry, I'm going to chime in. I'm not just. This is not just you doing it.
Good. All right. Well, yeah, the easiest way I like to do for people who have no background in spiral dynamics or any kind of system like that is to ask them, have you ever watched a child grow into adulthood, maybe your own, maybe a niece or nephew, and you notice that their complexity of thought changes, hopefully. A 5-year-old has a different level of complexity of thought than a 7-year-old, than a 12-year-old, than a 15-year-old, than a 25-year-old, than a 30-year-old. So, you can see a natural progression of more complexity of thinking, in this case, cognitive capacity in this case. Well, that is true in multiple different lines of development. You can see from moral development to, like I just said, cognitive development, emotional development, there's like 21 lines of development, that there are particular stages that people can go through. It's not guaranteed, but they can go through. spiral dynamics is one way of looking at that kind of thing, but theirs is more about V-memes or value sets or worldviews or perspectives, how people see the world in front of them, not necessarily cognitive capacity, although that does play a role, not necessarily emotionality, although that plays a role, not necessarily morality, although it shows up differently at different levels of complexity. So you can be with people and you can see where the life conditions might have created the conditions for them to express themselves in more levels of complexity in terms of their values over time. And it's not just with individuals, it's with cultures as well. So you can look at here in the US, Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, kind of we're in the information age, completely different worldview than what we preceded us, the industrial age, which is a completely different worldview. When I say worldview, it's not just like I think differently, but the techno-economic systems are different, the social structures are different, the economic dynamics are different. Previous to industrialization, you would have agriculture. Previous to agriculture, you can go further back, but each epic or world that is created from that particular worldview is different. And as we move from one to another, we never leave behind earlier ones. We transcend and include them. So like, you and I, we took our summers off from school when we were little kids, right? June, July, August. Why? That's when you're farming. I bet you and I weren't farming.
No, I was not farming.
But 200 years ago or 100 years ago, people were farming. So the kids on the farm had to go to school, and then they took the summers off to do the harvesting. So you can look at any epic, the new epic that emerges, and there's usually pieces of the old one that survive into the new one. And you keep going forward along those lines. That's just one way of thinking about it.
You know what? I've never even heard it in that way. So I'm glad that you explained it. I'm glad.
Okay, cool.
Because it is different than, it aligns with, but it's described differently than my original understanding of it. So I like that you bring in the levels of complexity, because what it seems like with spiral dynamics is, and for those who are unsure or who don't know what spiral dynamics are, one simple way to break it down is we could look at it as values levels of consciousness, and what you value increases in complexity the higher up you go. There's not one value that's better than another, but the values levels, they move with the changes in the needs of the environment. All right. So when we think about that, at least the way that I teach it to make it simple for my clients is that, you have your 8 values levels based on the work of Claire Graves, and each one, what initially, I guess, creates the priority of that values level is what I like to call, like, what is your Godhead at that level of complexity. So values level 1 is survival, right? You're just values level 1 consciousness. The complexity is that you're just aware that you are a being of some kind in physical reality. And so it's all survival. It's like eat, procreate, fight, like get what you need. And that's it. There's no more complexity beyond survival. And we don't, to my knowledge, there are no humans that are at values level 1 consciousness anymore, unless of course they're, out in the wild, feral. But again, that's probably not a thing. But that brings us to values level 2, which is the tribal values level, which the Godhead in that, as you know, is the tribe, right? The community. It's safety through the tribe itself. So it's very tribal consciousness, and it's let's do what the chief says. Like the chief is essentially the authority figure, the Godhead of that. So when I explain this to clients, because we do use it in coaching, is what does that level of complexity, what does that environment call for as your highest priority, or your source of truth, so to speak? And that source of truth moves and evolves over the development of the human being.
Completely agree. And I when I talk about this to you in this very second, a couple minutes ago, I'm conflating integral theory and spiral dynamics, because I was brought up at the time. This is so weird to say, when spiral dynamics and integral, Ken and Don were friends, and it's spiral dynamics integral, or integral theory included spiral dynamics, and they separated out and they're different. And if you ask me for pure spiral dynamics, I might share it a little differently than I did, but I didn't. So I appreciate you walking through that. And there are other models of maps that fit nicely. You know, like you can look at individuals, they go from egocentric
Mm-hmm.
to ethnocentric to world-centric as 3 examples. Egocentric is all about them.
Mm-hmm.
Sociocentric or ethnocentric is about their group, which is their tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And although it might not be a tribe like in South America or a tribe in Afghanistan, like if you're part of a football club, like, oh, I love the Redskins. I guess they're no longer the Redskins. I love Dallas,
Yeah.
or whatever your team is for your sport. That's tribal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm an American and F all those foreigners. Whatever you like, whatever your thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Or like you're in high school and it's like I'm part of this clique and I'm the cool kids and like everyone else is over there. We do tribal all the time.
That's right.
Not just like 3,000 years ago, we lived in little tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Like that, what you were saying is like we carry the previous values levels with us as we increase in complexity. And what I always found interesting is like let's just go through all 8 right now just to give context to this. So values level, we went through values level 1 and 2, but values level 3 would be egocentric, like you were saying. And the thing that I would say is the godhead to that person, to a person who is present and engaged in values level 3 would be themselves, right? Like they are the godhead, their image or their symbol of themselves, their ego. That's what's most important. So everything gets taken personally. There's no sense of shame. There's a lot of I love this term. I don't know if it's a real scientific term. I don't think it is, but it does sound funny. Is main character syndrome. Like,
oh, that's cool. Now I've heard that one.
I don't think it's a real term, but it is funny.
I'm telling you.
Yeah. So that would be like very values level 3, whereas values level 4 is rules and order given by the higher power. So very like organized religions would fall into this, government systems would fall into this, school systems, working for an employer and falling under the corporate structure, it falls under this. And so the godhead is, what are the rules? Like, what is the right and wrong way to do things? And
very binary.
Very much so. And many people fall into this category. And again, nobody is like a single values level. And I'm sure you share that with people as well. But their center, or at least like what they're most focused on or most present in, could be one. And what I've noticed in values level 4, because there is this whole idea of right and wrong, there is a lot of shame and guilt that drives behavior in this values level. What has your experience been like with that when you're working with somebody of like in values level 4?
Completely agree with you, because it's really interesting. And it's really important for folks to listen to know that we're not talking about types of people, we're talking about types in people.
Yes, that's a great distinction.
Yeah. And it's very flexible, and life conditions shift people around, and life experiences at various times can shift people around. So people can be at one general, as you said, level. Something happens, they can actually drop down to lower levels, and we can talk about that, or sometimes pop up to higher levels, which is an interesting phenomenon. But with my clients, most of them are not at that general level in terms of their general sense. They're higher, but they still obviously is transcendent included, so they still have that programming in them. Yes. And it's no judgment on the programming. It's no judgment on people who want to live there or want to. That's what they live there as their general place, being in the world. But it's about deprogramming some of the messages that they got, which limit them from fully expressing and living out their lives. Because if you operate out of shame, because you were sinful, or whatever the religious system says is the term for doing it wrong, then you operate out of kind of the reward. Well, I'm going to do it the right way so I can get rewarded. I'm not going to do it the wrong way because I want to get punished. And that sets up a really interesting split in the psyche. So you're not operating out of freedom of choice. You might think you are, but you're really operating out of fear and then the shame.
Yes.
And you got to you don't have to, but our work, here's my work with people.
You get to, you'd like to.
Program. Yeah,
right.
You get to deprogram that stuff. See it, and then deprogram it.
That's very interesting, because I noticed that one of the hardest transitions that a person makes is from values level 4 to values level 5. And it's something that both you and I did in our own way. Like you leaving your MBA was that the nature of that was that kind of a move. It's like I'm getting out of like what's expected and the rules and like what I'm told is good by society necessarily, and I'm going to go my own path because I believe that this gets me ahead in these ways, which brings us to values level 5, which many would call the entrepreneurial consciousness, or the not falling into someone else's rule set or structure, but pioneering your own rules and structure, which is interesting because those who try to jump over a values level or skip one usually find a lot of resistance and a difficult time, because we need to learn to some degree how structure works. We must have experience of that. And what I notice is the jump from values level 4 of, being within a structure and listening to all the rules, to values level 5, where now you're bending rules in order to get ahead, to win, to achieve, to think beyond what has been established for you and creating your own path. That's a very difficult jump to make sometimes, because you get a lot of criticism from family, from friends, from society itself.
A word that comes to mind, because I was thinking about we talked about it's very binary, right or wrong, evil or good. And 2 words that come to mind for this level is effectiveness and efficiencies.
Yeah.
Because you think about like not just the individual, but you look at history. We left the feudal system for the Enlightenment. The feudal system is very blue, like you're told what to do, how to live. There's a clear hierarchy, evil, good, right, wrong. And then the Enlightenment emerges, and it's like, oh, we recognize the individual. We don't recognize these unnatural hierarchies by force. I'm the king. That doesn't work in the Enlightenment. We recognize the dignity of the individual, but also the markets more fully emerge. And the market, allegedly, if it's not crony capitalism, is about efficiencies and effectiveness, right? How can I use the least amount of resources to provide the best service possible, or good, or whatever it happens to be?
That's right. Yeah. So
that's where that kind of emerges.
Right. That Godhead becomes success itself, like success of the individual and success of what they're putting out, maybe in the form of a business, a product, a service, that sort of thing. So that's a very interesting view on it. And then I've always heard this, is that the values level 5 is the master of the material world, right? They're the ones that they're driven to make money, to have success, to have material resources and an abundance of that in their lives. But naturally, when they have more than they need for long enough, they get to that point where they go, what's this all for? And then we begin to emerge into values level 6, which is the social consciousness values level, where we start to come into asking the deeper questions, exploring emotions and feelings, and talking through a lot of this type of stuff. And values level 6, to use a crass term, it's like the hippie consciousness, but it's in some ways it's looking into how does everybody feel? Does everybody feel good? Does everybody feel understood and heard? And going into that, I want to talk about a specific detail around values level 6, but essentially the trajectory from values level 5 to 6 is that person, they have enough material success to the point where it no longer fulfills them in the way that it used to, or no longer excites them. And they start to wonder beyond. They start to ask the question, like, who am I? Why am I here? What is the point of all of this? And they start to explore spirituality, or different new age practices. Maybe they get into yoga, maybe they get into meditation, but it's more so about love and light at values level 6. So what's your perspective on that transition?
Another word is the sensitive self emerges. You become sensitive to like other needs besides. We've already talked about survival and order and law and order and stuff like that, but besides efficiency and effectiveness and strive drive, and I'm going to be successful, whatever that means for our culture. And the sensitive self emerges, and I would like to kind of use the context of history.
Yes.
This particular sensitive self, or the green mean, mostly emerged in the 60s, when people started recognizing, well, wait, we can have efficiencies and effectiveness, like we can have great material things, but we're destroying the environment. Like we have to be sensitive to environmental conditions. So that's where the environmental movement writ large came onto the scene. Feminism started coming onto the scene. Not that these things weren't in existence before, they really blew up on the scene.
Right. Yeah.
Around the same time too.
Emergence to these things.
Yeah. Because it's like, oh wait, we're women, we have full dignity. We need to explore and express our full dignity as human beings. Feminism emerges. racial equality, the racial, the civil rights movement. Well, wait, we have to be inclusive and sensitive, not only to ourselves, but groups of people who did not benefit from the earlier stages of development.
Yes.
Like here in the States, it could be the Native Americans or African Americans. And, so those movements started to emerge in the 60s and 70s as well. And what's fascinating is like each V-mean or stage of development has positive and negatives. So like, you can get too much of the extreme in one and you can see the negatives emerging. My point in saying that is like, it's not all love and light. There are consequences to the emergence of a new value mean. There are some possible negative ones and then positive ones too. So it might be important at some point to talk about those two.
Oh yeah, and I think that's a really important conversation, is that the emergence of the sensitive self, like you're saying, is really great for inclusion and for empathy, like social empathy, and making sure that people are seen, that people are heard, that nobody's left in the dark, right? So there's a lot of inclusion there. And what I find interesting is in values level 6, there's also no real proclivity, or not a big proclivity towards action, towards taking action or creating results, so to speak. It's very much about being in those feelings and talking about those feelings, which is interesting because it's almost a rejection of the values level 5 of like doing, taking action, creating success. And it's almost a rejection of that and like kind of pushing it away in order to kind of swing the pendulum in the other direction of like, through our action, we've done so much harm to the environment, to ourselves. Maybe we've let our health go because we're so focused on making money and creating success in our life. So we swing the pendulum the other way to values level 6. And what I find interesting is in that, when somebody is, blissed out and they're for long enough, they're practicing their meditation, their yoga and all that for a long enough time, then values level 7 emerges with the question of like, I need to do something. Like I need to do something about these causes that I'm thinking about these problems that I see in the world. Because values level 6, one of the, I guess you could say, like the negative sides of it, or the weaker sides of it, is it's the recognition of problems, but not any action towards the problems. So no execution.
Yeah, and I would say like it's not completely the lack of execution, but I agree with you that those are some limitations. Part of it is like you can't necessarily do consensus building and also take action in a short period of time to get things accomplished.
That's true, right? Yeah, because everybody needs to be heard, right? So if you are getting a consensus, like the speed of decision slows down dramatically. So that's a much better way to put it. It's not that they don't like action; it's just everybody needs to be heard and their ideas need to be acknowledged. So that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Then the values level 7 emergence of what can I do about this? What's the result that needs to get done? Like I'm not getting any results by doing things in this way. And so values level 7, the way that I've learned it is it was taught as flex and flow, where the most important thing is results, and not just results. It's not like values level 5, where values level 5 is looking for results for self, wants recognition for self in the material world. But a values level 7 consciousness is more so looking for what are the results that are going to solve actual systemic problems. Like what can we do about these problems? And values level 7 doesn't care if it gets the recognition. It will very gladly put someone else in charge if that's the best person to do the job, because it's about the result, not about necessarily the recognition for the result.
Yeah, and I like the flex flow. And another thing about it, the way to think about it is like functional fit.
Functional fit,
like
yeah.
The hierarchies are completely broken down. They're hierarchies, but like what role does a person have to play at a particular time to accomplish a particular goal? And then they can switch out. They don't have to be stuck in that role. They can move to a different role depending on what is needed to get accomplished. And one of the ways I like to think about second tier, it's called second tier in this level, is like each of the earlier ones, the first 6, they fight each other. Like the blue one, the right, wrong, binary, order, law and order. They look at anything, not them. They're like, it's evil. It's evil. It's evil. Let's fight them for the most part. And the other ones can look at them and say, oh, you're in the nut. Whatever. So there's like, that's where if you they probably wouldn't say they're in that, but actually they might say they're in that.
They might.
But that's where the cultural wars can come from. You actually can diagnose and assess it, or here in the States, the cultural wars we're facing, but looking at the different developmental stages that these different groups of people are at and why they fight each other, the words they use, the way they talk about each other. That's how the first 6 stages work. Not the first one, they're just surviving, but
Right.
they look at each other and they
2
fight.
through 6.
Yeah.
That's
Second tier, or the 7th one, is the first time you have the ability to step into the first 6 by choice and operate from those levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
So you're at level 7, you can go play in someone who's in the law and order space, understand where they're coming from and meet them where they're at, not be attached, not be so triggered by them. Same with 4th, 5th, and 6th level. You can work with anyone because you understand where they're coming from, and you can step out and go to a different level of consciousness.
That's
so you
right.
can see where generally where people are at. You can see where they're at before, what might be next for them. That can't occur until 2nd tier.
Correct. Yeah, I think
Previous to that, you're
that's
stuck in
really
the
interesting. Could you break down the difference between those 2 tiers?
So the first 6, one way to think about it is each stage is in and of itself, looking out at the world, unique. It is the right way of seeing the world. And anything that's not that, they look at the other ones, they're like, oh, that's something's wrong with that. Those other people who think that way. And you can look at any of the issues here in the States with that kind of vision. Social conservatives versus the progressives. Progressives are usually 6th level, green mean, and social conservatives are usually blue or 2nd or 3rd level, law and order. They're just completely different worldviews. That's what they fight.
That's right.
Right. And you can look at any of the dynamics that way through that mirror. It's a really good tool. If you're in a particular worldview, that's the way you see the world. You're not really able to step out, observe it objectively, and say, "Oh, wait, hold on, let me start questioning this." Now that does happen, and eventually pops you into a higher worldview. But if it's your center of gravity, that's kind of like it's your glasses, and they're glued to your face for the most part, unless something really strangely occurs in the environment, psychedelic trip, or some deep meditation,
something that,
or something
shoots you into that.
Blows you, blows you up to see something differently. But here's my glasses. This is a worldview. When you're 2nd tier, let's just say there's like 6 different glasses from the colors, 4 levels. 2nd tier is the first time you can say, "Oh, wait, I can see 1. I put on those glasses. Okay. I can see 2, I can see 3, I can see 4, I can see 5. I understand why they believe what they believe. I understand the techno-economic systems affiliated with them, their social structures, their psychology. It just makes sense why they believe what they believe and what they do, why they do what they do." But 2nd tier is the first time you're able to step into the earlier, less complex levels of development and see them more clearly, not fully clearly, but more clearly. Previous to that, you're stuck at your level. You're not going to be able to, like if you're level 6, the green meme or the sensitive self, you're not going to be going, "Oh, wait, let me feel into a law and order person and understand where they're coming from." You're going to think, "Oh my God, that authoritarian, Nazi, fascist, whatever, blah, 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 whatever you characterize them, they're bad."
That's right. I find it super interesting because
so that's one way of thinking 2nd tier versus the first tier.
It's definitely a really interesting way of seeing it, because one thing that I've noticed, or like to me, it's like a holding pattern around levels of consciousness, which is a values level 4, 6 is kind of like what I've come to understand it as, which is somebody who lives in the society of 4 and abides by 4 rules, but thinks and acts like a values level 6. So it's almost as though they live in a 4 container, like that's their environment. That's also the way that they think about work, about other people, about themselves. There's obviously a lot of guilt and shame associated with that, but they operate in the values level 6, entertaining the whole love and light spiritual style of thinking. And what's really fascinating about that is I have often seen a person the reason why I call it a holding pattern is because they're essentially jumping over values level 5. They're jumping over any kind of like entrepreneurial type of thought into this like love and light space, which is, there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but there will be some sort of friction that happens as almost like a bypass, like a bypass of consciousness evolution. And in doing so,
Well, yeah,
they may feel compelled to shame those who disagree with them. Even though the original intention is inclusion, they might shame those who are against their cause or feel like they are wrong because they are not with their cause.
So 3 thoughts on that real quickly. In spiral dynamics, as taught by Don Beck and I believe Chris Cowan, they don't believe you can skip stages. Jenny Wade, who I also study with, who's a developmental psychologist who has Wade mindsets, which is a very similar type of system, which was research-based. She says you can. So like, okay, we can have a theoretical debate. I just want to throw that out there if anyone's like, what? Okay. All right. And so we talked about transcend and include. So I would wonder, is the person who operates from this, and I might be a little bit messy with my language because we're in a conversation. I'm not teaching something,
of
but
course.
like types in people, not types of people. But someone who's operating from a level 6 sensitive self, green mean, I would say more likely, maybe, is that they have not cleared out their 4-level stuff yet. So they're bringing it in.
Correct.
So that's why you can see some real, like, in some of the social justice movements, very exclusiveness, like you just said, because they're not going to use the damnation, Judeo-Christian language of sin and evil and good and stuff like that. But they'll use their own language of like, he or she is whatever, because they're not part of our group. They don't say the world the way I do. They're less evolved, they're blah, 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 whatever they call them, every kind of name in the book. But it's a very similar attitude.
Yes.
From that level, from the blue meme or the 4th level of development, where it's right or wrong, but they're just bringing it into, because they haven't cleared it out, the 6th level.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. And I wouldn't even say they necessarily skip a values level. I think a person like that would be thinking in a different, with like the language of a different values level, while still, like you said, kind of carrying or not closing out the stuff from the current values level. If it's even in my own life, when I realize this about myself, because I do a lot of reflecting on this in myself, and I noticed that although I've been operating primarily in a values level 5, right, being a business owner, being a coach, doing these things, like that's how I live. Like I often will think in 6 and 7, values level 6 and 7. But what I had realized upon some reflection is that I was actually carrying a lot of remnants of values level 4 within myself, kind of wanting a sense of security, wanting a sense of safety provided from something outside of myself. And it took me a while to realize that. But when I did, I realized, I'm like, oh, like it's totally messing me up to be to be trying to be in these higher values levels of like 5 and 6 and 7, while, or at least thinking in that way, being an entrepreneur, being spiritual and practicing Zen and Stoicism and all these things. Like it's very difficult for me to like operate in that while I still have remnants or attachment, even if it's through rejection of a previous values level, which is, that's a whole other conversation of emotional attachment. But even if it's that, it's important that I close that out and that I let that go. So it's a whole journey, I feel, in a lot of this. It's quite interesting, because I noticed that even in myself, and upon letting it go, what I noticed was like, I was no longer driven by any kind of guilt within myself of like not fulfilling what I thought I was supposed to fulfill, or having to please others, so to speak. And it was very paradigm shifting to let that go.
Good on you. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, it takes some reflecting, but and so,
well, and I'd say knowing you, it's
admission
not
to
just
self.
you've done a lot of work too. It's not just sitting there thinking about it. You've done a lot of like other like complementary work with it.
That would be fair to say. So that's quite fascinating. And just to close out the values level conversation, could you share what your perspective of values level 8 is?
No. No, and the reason I say that, I mean, I have some intuitive hits, but I don't want to.
Okay.
because and I'll explain why. I have spent a lot of time with spiral dynamics people. Like I studied under Don Beck, and I know a lot of those folks. And a lot of them are very concerned with people like me and themselves and others kind of in the spiral dynamics world, talking about things as possibilities without the research supporting it. Conjecture.
Yes.
So like, the eighth thing is the second tier, seventh, is starting to emerge more fully. It's 5% of the population, I think, is what Wilbur suggested it might be, or something really small, but significant number. But like, the eighth would be really, really small, that people are coming out and operating in that space. So for me to say, oh, this is what it is, I don't think that'd be a really good idea. Let's give some time for more people to show up in that space and see what ideas, what social structures, what economic systems kind of emerge out of that.
I like it.
Okay, cool.
Leave a little cliffhanger.
We'll come back in 50 years and continue the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. There will be a part 2 to this in an indefinite amount of time. But yeah, I think that the understanding and the study of values levels and spiral dynamics is very helpful for understanding dynamics of even your own interpersonal relationships, right? There are a lot of times where there are disagreements that occur and miscommunication that is merely a difference in values levels. And like, once that's understood, there's actually a deep amount of compassion and empathy you could have for that person, to realize first and foremost that they literally do not think like you at all. Like, they're not in the same universe of thought. And so by understanding spiral dynamics, and it's definitely something I would encourage any of the audience here or listeners to go and research, it can provide a lot of insight into perhaps a lot of challenges that occur in our interpersonal relationships. Right, a lot of these things are just values levels misfire.
Completely agree, and also for anyone who does OD work or works within a business or as an entrepreneur like you work with, that's your clientele. It's like, if you understand spiral dynamics, you then know how to create the structures within your business for functional fit, for the best productivity, health, wellness of the employees and the planet, but also profit. You have a better understanding of how to structure the different subgroups within a business based on like a model of spiral dynamics. So it's really good for those kind of things as well.
Absolutely. So I want to shift gears for a second, because I know the field of psychology that you went into was transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
That was the pivot that you made, and I'm curious because I'm unfamiliar with what transpersonal psychology is. So if you wouldn't mind sharing what that is and the type of work that you do with clients in that realm.
So multiple different ways to explain transpersonal. I'll just use the word itself: trans, through and beyond the personal. So recognition that the individual has a personality, an identity that emerges mostly through the interactions of their environment, family of origin type of things, their personality.
Yes.
But there's an essential nature that exists prior to that. And or people have access to information outside their 5 senses once they let go of their particular identity. Like, this is who I am, this is my personality structure. So it's transcending the limited person we think we are. Now, in practice, like what we've studied is a few different things. One is, within every religious system, there are spiritual practices which help people expand beyond their limited self-sense. Meditation, yoga practices, sensory deprivation, psychedelics, prayer, chanting. There's various interesting pain techniques people use. A wide variety of practices within different religious systems that help people expand beyond their limited identity, open their mind, open their heart, free their body. So for me, it was like studying the various practices, understanding the effects they have on the individual, and helping people who want to. Not everyone wants to. Like, I'm cool with myself, I don't want to change. Okay, it's cool. But if you want to change, you have to transcend the limitations of your own personal identity at that moment, and expand. And then I work with clients to help with practices that allow them to expand, allow them to continue to expand. Because you expand, like, you have a new identity to live more expansive, you lock into place. That's the new person that I am. Like, okay, cool. Yes. And if you want to recognize that this is still a new limited identity, but it's maybe more expansive than it was, still limited, let's keep expanding if you want to. So when I studied in grad school, I studied all these different practices. And then, as you know, because it's becoming more and more popular, psychedelic medicines or plant medicines
Mm,
are a tool that's becoming more popular in our culture.
yes.
To say more popular, it's always been around for like 50, 60 years, but more legally available
Mhm.
because of the mass research that are being done and ketamine clinics that are rising. And I think within 2 years, the Biden administration just made an announcement recently that's, I think, MDMA and psilocybin will be removed from Schedule 1
Oh,
or
that's
Schedule 4.
fantastic news.
Yes, so it'll be available for more
Mhm.
clinical studies
Yeah, that's
and
great.
eventual use. All that stuff is really good. But like psychedelic medicines is one example of a tool used appropriately. That's really
Mhm.
important that can help someone break out of the limited self sense.
Mm.
And I happen to have done my master's thesis on the therapeutic uses of LSD and MDMA in
Oh,
the
wow.
late 90s. So this is a long, long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was not nearly as accepted at that point in time.
No, most of my research was for the underground, because it wasn't
Mhm.
like I could go to a clinic and say, "Hey, come talk. Let me talk to you
Mhm.
about how it's going." Because yeah, it
Wow.
was all illegal back then.
Mhm.
I think it was in the early 70s. The war on drugs
Yes.
criminalized that research.
Mhm. Somebody had to do it, and you decided to step in. Do the
Well,
research that was very much needed.
I'll tell you something interesting. Just using back to spot dynamics really quickly. When
Mhm.
I shared with my fellow students, and keep in mind this is a transpersonal program, so everyone should be, you'd imagine, open to altered states,
Mhm.
non-ordinary states, higher states, whatever you want to call them. When I shared that I was going to do this particular subject, I got a lot of pushback.
Mm.
And I was so surprised. Like, wait, this is a transpersonal school that you got. But I sat with it, like, you sit with things, you think about it. And like, they were so um, propagandized by the Mrs. Reagan just say no,
Mhm.
that drugs were bad. And it
Mhm.
still hadn't gotten out of their system. So their reaction was like, oh, drugs are bad. Meditation's fine. Yoga's fine. You can do a little breath work. No drugs, which
Mm.
is just fascinating. It's like, holy shit, things have changed a lot
Mm.
now compared to 30 years ago, or almost 30 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's wild how much of a transformation there's been on just the perspective there. But in the best of ways, right? These things can be very helpful. I know they've been very helpful in my life. Um, Especially when, like you said, used responsibly, used appropriately. I think that's one of the most important things, is to use them with intention. We have such a limited view of ourselves sometimes, thinking that we are just the personality or the ego. And the reality is, it's just, the way I see it, at least, is it's a symbol for yourself, right? It's just the finger pointing at the moon, but it is not the moon. And I know you enjoy
Yeah.
that. You and I have talked about that at length.
Yeah, that's my favorite scene, Enter the Dragon.
That's right. That's right. So the other question I'm curious about, Michael, is what, like, with your work right now, in where you are currently, what inspires you most at this point in time?
Couples, actually.
Hmm.
So I was originally trained as a marriage and family therapist. So I did a lot of work with families and couples, also individuals and groups.
Mhm.
But since switching to coaching, I've been doing mostly groups and individuals. I work for SealFit. I work for
Mhm.
another company called Spartan 7. I work for Dan and Micro at Parent Zoe. I run my own coaching program, lots of other hats.
Mhm.
But in the last 2 years, I've gone back to my original roots
Mm.
and started working with the couples. And I love it for a couple of different reasons. One, if I'm working with an individual and they have like relationship issues and they start talking about their spouse or their partner, I'm only getting their representation in their minds of what they see, the experiences of the other person, or the thinking of the other person, their behaviors. Okay, it's useful, but it's very minimal. It's
Mm.
incomplete, put it that way. When you work with a couple, you can't hide. It's so
That's
there.
right.
Even if they don't say anything, you can get the energy, you can get the facial expressions, the breathing patterns, the muscle tension. You can
Mhm.
just see it. The way
Yes.
they face or not face each other, how they sit next to each other or not, how they touch each other or not. It's so real.
Mhm.
And the transformation I see in the middle of a session is so exciting. Like people just have these breakthroughs,
Mhm.
either personally shared with the other person in the room or interpersonally, like something just breaks through in the relationship and they take it to the next level.
Mhm.
And that is so exciting. I mean, I work with some of our mutual friends,
Mhm.
and I'm just loving on them. Like, love to see like the growth that they're going through,
Yeah.
and it's just really exciting. And it's, for me, it's a fun place to explore and try new techniques. Like, 'cause I like you, and like I meditate a lot and I think a lot about stuff, and like, oh man, I'm going to try this thing with them because I think it'd really work really well. And I try it, and boom,
Yeah, you
mostly
see,
it works. Sometimes it
exactly.
doesn't.
You get to experience, like, changing your approach, being flexible. And that's one of the big, I think one of the best, most important traits when it comes to coaching is the ability to be flexible in behavior and in your approach as well.
Completely agree. Completely agree. So couples, and then I love when I'm working with individuals, because I work very somatically, to watch them deepen their own connection to their own physical self sense.
Yes.
And even if they get into non-ordinary states, but through the body, as opposed to just like, I'm leaving the body, I'm kicking off to the transcendent universe. No, like they're embodying themselves, they're really getting into themselves, and they're having deep, sometimes cathartic experiences, sometimes just connecting with parts of themselves they haven't been connecting with for various biographical reasons, trauma, whatever it happens to be. It's like, it's so exciting to just see people go, wow. And it's not a cognitive thing. Like, it's cool. Like, I loved having conversations, like, and they're like, oh, that's really cool. That's really interesting. Like, that's cool. But like when someone goes, and it's the whole body like lights up, not just their cognition. That's also exciting for me too.
It is. I've been a part of that as one of your clients in session, right? Like, I remember, I think probably my favorite session, you and I barely said a word. I don't know what happened, but I dropped into this meditative state for like the entire duration of the session. And it was some of the most peace I ever felt, like, ever. And just, I didn't understand why it came to be. And then I started to try to talk about it. You're like, no, stay there.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. I wouldn't bring that up, obviously, because probably, but you brought it up, so I can
I brought
acknowledge
it up.
it.
Curious.
Yes.
Your perspective of that moment, because I thought that was interesting.
And I think what you just said, I want to highlight, like you wanted to talk about. I'm like, no, just stay with it, because we, not just you and I, but we generally speaking, seem to have a tendency to like create stories. I want to talk about what just happened and create a story, make it into a rock, and then put it over here. And that's cool. Okay, we do that. We were story creating humans. That's kind of what we do. But I find that can be really limiting. Like if you create the story too soon, you're cutting off half. Maybe I'm making those up, but God knows, half of the experience. The wisdom, the intelligence in that, whatever the experience might be, you might be only touching a piece of it.
Correct.
And now I got to create a story and explain it, and find a theory that explains it, as opposed to like, let's just stay with it and see what emerges in the whole body and the whole system.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. It just, language itself puts boundaries upon our experience. And you've studied Zen as I have as well. And one thing that is very apparent is that even when people ask, like, how would you define Zen? And a lot, like, the typical answer is, if you start to try to define Zen, you start to dilute the experience of it, because it's not a philosophy. It's a direct experience, and language itself puts stories around our direct experience and abstracts it from reality itself. And it's something that I'm sure you resonate with, this quote from Bruce Lee as well, but life is better lived than conceptualized. So
you'll appreciate this. So when I was in therapy school, you had to be in therapy. So and my MO is like, well, I'm not just gonna have one therapist. I'm gonna have tons of therapists, because I want to get different perspectives and different things. And I had one guy who's actually a Zen practitioner. He's also a Reichian. So I walk into the session and I sit down. I start telling my story, because I love my story, and this is my story, and blah, 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 blah. 2-3 minutes in, he tells me to shut up and breathe. For the next 45 minutes, I have to be quiet and just breathe. And it was so uncomfortable, because I wanted to share my story, because I'm so attached to my story. It took me a while to get the lesson. I'm like, oh shit, there goes my mind telling the stories I want to share with him, so he understands who I am, as opposed to like, oh, I can just be with myself.
Yeah.
And breathe. And just be. That was a huge lesson for me. That was really cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love the way Zen practitioners do their coaching, so to speak. It's always so ridiculous. It's like, okay, cool. Stop talking for 45 minutes and just breathe. I'm gonna go hang out over here and have some tea.
And I'm paying you for this?
You're paying me to have tea. Be quiet now.
Oh man.
So before we begin to wrap up, Michael, I wanted to ask you, this is so this segment of the Zen Stoic path is not specifically about Zen Stoic or Zen or Stoicism for that matter, but it's for what Zen Stoic aims at, which it aims at living a liberated life. So my question to you is, what does it mean to live a liberated life?
So I would say it has a possible few definitions for me immediately. Like it would be nice if I could think about this and give you like a whole thesis, but
I want it to be spontaneous.
One is being, I know, I understand. One is being free from programming, cultural, family of origin, religious, national, ethnic, intergenerational, ancestral. Now, nothing is wrong with any of those things. That's just how the kind of human system operates and the social system works. But like liberation is being free from those, or at least seeing those dynamics in oneself and being at choice. So you're not operating from how others think you should be in the world. Others being like I said, all those different things. We're like, what do I really want to do, to be, to explore, to express at any moment over time, that is more true to me as a human being than being culturally programmed by these different factors or different systems in our lives. And my experience would suggest is not just about, it's all about me and I want to be free from all these things and do my own thing. Okay, that's like step one. Okay. So like you're against those things, you free yourself from them, you're liberated from them. Cool. But like, I find that once you kind of get to the second stage of that, it's more like the deeper you dive into your own system, the more you recognize you're actually part of this larger, greater, huger, more expansive system or systems, really.
Yes.
So it's not just about what I want to do, and I'm going to be like the teenager, or the 2-year-old, terrible twos. It's more like I'm free of these things, or more free on that choice, but I'm also operating from the place of deep love, care, and compassion, awe at the world around me. And once you're in that kind of space, the creativity just can kind of flow, because that is the nature, at least my experience, of spirit, reality, the world.
Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thanks.
That is a great definition. And it's also a great practical first step, right? Is to figure out how to free yourself from the programming that keeps you bound at this juncture in one's life, right? And that could start with something as simple as changing the way that you speak about yourself, changing the way that you define yourself to yourself, for that matter, and some of the beliefs that uphold that limited identity. So I do like that definition. I think it's also the first step is within.
It's interesting because yes, the first step was within, but I think it can take many cases working with a coach like you, who can understand like the patterns and the programming and how you could help me or help your clients like see them,
that's right,
deconstruct them, and then operate from this more place of play, creativity, fun, and love.
Yeah, the thing itself is simple, but the process to get that thing is very complex. And it's where a coach or a good therapist can come in and really help with that, especially if they have the training to do so, to help you with the deconditioning of old programming. So I sincerely appreciate you being on the show, Michael. This was awesome. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Cool. Thanks, Victor.
Where can people find you if they want to look more into your work?
Michael D. Ostrolenk is my website. MICHAEL, the letter D, Ostrolenk, OSTROLENK. That's my name. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter. I'm M Ostrolenk, M, and then my last name. So any of those places, you can reach out to me and see what I'm up to and ask me questions. And if there's anything that could be helpful, we can have that conversation too.
Amazing. Awesome. Cool. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show, and looking forward to having you on again soon so we can close that loop. Hopefully it's not 50 years and that would be good.
Cool. Thanks, Victor.
Awesome.